I am responsible for our new facility in National Harbor, Maryland, which is opening later this quarter, potentially coinciding with the ARPA-E summit that Dave just referenced, ARPA-E. I'm also responsible for aspects of our business here in Detroit, Michigan. Actually, funny story, I was recruiting Local Motors and the founder, Jay Rogers, to come to Detroit when I was working for Mayor Duggan in economic development last year. And then when I left the mayor's office, he recruited me to lead some of our efforts in Detroit and also lead some efforts with regards to our federal government activities with the Department of Energy. So that's me. This is what happened, and what Jay referenced happened 2014 in September the first time, and it happened January 2015 the second time when we 3D printed the Strati at the Detroit Auto Show. By the way, it was right across from the GM booth, and so Steve, sorry if we made a little bit too much noise. This year we won't. Run the video, please. Next slide. Let me start by, how many of you have heard of Local Motors before today? Oh, wow. Okay, excellent. So let me tell a little bit of the story of how we got to this point. And if you could just go back to the picture, thank you. So Local Motors was founded in 2007 by Jay Rogers, who came up with the notion of the urge and the need to develop Local Motors when he was a Marine and serving time in Iraq and Afghanistan. A couple of his buddies on tour were killed, and he was quite upset because we were fighting wars because of our dependency on oil. And obviously, the automotive industry is one of those industries that currently is still relatively dependent on fossil fuels and obviously oil. And so he came up with the notion and went to business school at Harvard and wrote the business plan over his 2 years there and incorporated Local Motors. And our genesis of what we really want to do, and the earlier question of what are there really models happening in true disruption of fundamentally changing the automotive industry? And that's what Jay came up with. And our platform is really based around co-creation and micro-manufacturing. So we are harnessing the power of the crowd to fundamentally change the development cycle and development process of a vehicle. So we work with engineers, industrial designers, car enthusiasts, consumers that do both online and offline work to go and help us develop a vehicle. And that's what led us to develop the Strati in 2014 with a relationship with Oak Ridge National Lab, where we started that development process in January of 2014, and we 3D printed the first one in September. So in a 9-month period, we developed a first 3D printed car. The one thing that's interesting, traditionally OEMs and vehicles have roughly 25 to 30,000 components. The 3D printed car has roughly 50. So it's a much simpler development cycle. So that was step one, is the co-creation process. Step two is the process of how do we actually manufacture. And we believe in manufacturing in small batches within one of our microfactories. Instead of the traditional model where even today, Faraday Future announced recently, they're going to go disrupt the automotive industry, but they're putting $1 billion plant in Nevada somewhere. And we all know that the auto industry is very capital intensive. And so what we're believing is if we can reduce that capital intensity, we can obviously reduce a lot of the cost as well as the development cycle. So we're planning to put 100 vehicles into the 100 microfactories up around the world over the next 10 years. The first one we developed in 2009 in Phoenix, Arizona. And the second one we developed actually in 2013 in Louisville, Kentucky, with General Electric in our first build partnership with them. And the most recent ones we're building right now in Knoxville, Tennessee, as well as in sales and demonstration facility in National Harbor, Maryland. And so those two combinations of co-creation, harnessing the power of the crowd, and micro-manufacturing, creating locally relevant vehicles at a small scale in small batches. Each microfactory has roughly a capacity of around 2,000 to 3,000 vehicles a year, is what the genesis of Local Motors is. And so what we've done over the last 7, 8 years is we worked on creating the Rally Fighter, which is actually not a 3D printed vehicle. It was a street legal Desert Razor that actually has a LS3 engine from GM, so appreciate that. Has about 430 horsepower. So that was the process of actually establishing that we can go create a car with our process and our platform. And so then we continued to develop that model. A couple of years later, President Obama and DARPA called us, and we actually developed a vehicle for them in a matter of about 6 months and at $400,000. And so people started noticing that there is a way to do things differently in the automotive industry and bring vehicles to market. And that fast forward to 2014 when we created the Strati. And so we announced at the auto show in January that we were going to create the world's first 3D printed highway legal certified car. So FMVSS certified by the end of 2016, beginning of 2017. And that's the path that we're taking right now. And that is happening with the introduction of the LM3D that we announced at SEMA this past November. And actually, unfortunately, this year we're not exhibiting in Detroit. But we felt like what we're doing there, we went from a design challenge in June of 2015 to an actual prototype in September of 2015. That took us 43 days to go from the design of the LM3D Swim to the first prototype that we revealed at SEMA. So there's a different way of doing automotive development and automotive production that we believe. And in the future, that's what we'll be focused on. And I don't want to take a lot of time, so I think we can take the answers from and Q&A from Jay. Thank you.